In the 16th century, Guillaume Postel, 1510 to 1581, a Christian Hebraist and devoted student of the Kabbalah, shared with his readers a list of the secret narratives of sacred Hebrew scripture, Secreti Commentari della Scrittura Sacra Hebraica. The list consisted of 8 corpora, the much-anticipated Zohar and Bahir, commentaries on the 10 Sefirot, and Rabbot, Midrash, Yalkut, Tanhuma, and Ilanot. Postel, the scholar, naturally included the central works of rabbinic Agada alongside the Kabbalistic classics, given the widely held perception that the former were, in essence, esoteric. Commentaries on the Sefirot, the divine categories or attributes that constitute the heart of Kabbalistic theosophical speculation, were likewise among the most widely disseminated works of Kabbalah in its earliest centuries, and thus represented a natural choice too. Only one term in Postel's list, Ilanot, cannot be elucidated simply by consulting the Encyclopaedia Judaica in any of its editions, from which it is entirely absent 3. Nor does it appear in the major authoritative studies of Jewish mysticism. Neither Gershom Scholem's Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, nor Moshe Edel's Kabbalah, New Perspectives, nor Elliot R. Wolfson's Through a Speculum That Shines, Vision and Imagination in Medieval Jewish Mysticism, to name 3 of the most celebrated and comprehensive works, makes any mention of the Ilanot. This is the first book devoted to the Ilanot, a Hebrew word meaning trees. An Ilan is a cosmological iconotext inscribed on parchment. The term Ilan in the singular refers both to the arboreal scheme used by Kabbalists to represent the 10 Sefirot, and, by synekdosh, to the parchment itself, upon which this image is inscribed. From the moment Kabbalists in the 14th century began to produce them, the Ilanot never attracted the attention of modern scholars of Kabbalah. Even today, the genre remains esoteric. For much of the 19th century and well into the 20th, Jewish religious visualization was overlooked in modern academic studies. This was not accidental, but rather the result of a deeply ingrained devaluation of images within the study of Judaism, a discipline that remained largely blind to visual culture until well into the 1980s. Historians of religion, science, and art systematically ignored epistemological images for most of the century. 20th century art historians likewise showed little interest in diagrams that appeared to lie at the margins. They were not considered fully art, nor texts in the strict sense. This long era of neglect came to an end with the publication, in 2005, of Giulio Buzi's volume on visual Kabbalah, which for the first time offered a pioneering survey of the material. An Ilan is not a tree of life, nor is it a mythological motif or a perennial symbol. It belongs to a specific genre, whose name was taken from the arboreal scheme that represents the divine at its core. The god diagrammed here is conceived at a considerable distance from the biblical God of Israel, creator of the universe, supreme and reigning above the innumerable hierarchies of divine beings. The Greco-Arabic conquest of Jewish thought in the Middle Ages introduced theologies situated along a Platonic Aristotelian spectrum, none of which accepted the God of Scripture in its plain sense, let alone the even more vividly characterized deity evoked in so many ancient rabbinic sources. God, as prime mover or first cause, lies wholly beyond cognition and description, yet his actions and attributes constitute the interface between God and creation, and in that sense may be known. These actions and attributes, which Kabbalistic theology normalized under the name Sefirot, are presented as 2 aspects. On the one hand, Ein Sof, without end, the absolutely ineffable, the infinite. On the other, the chain of emanations that descends from that origin towards the multiplicity of the world. In some Ilanot, the names Ein Sof or Keter, the crown, may appear explicitly written on the parchment, sometimes enclosed within a circle and positioned beyond the arboreal articulation of the 10 Sefirot. An illustrative example can be found in a parchment copy of clearly Ashkenazic aesthetic, in which Ein Sof appears within a medallion partially obscured in black, a deliberately abstract symbol. This signifier is not intended to resemble anything in particular. Its function is to symbolize the impenetrability of the divine to human thought. In the tree of the 10 Sephirot, the name of each Sephira, singular, is written prominently within each circle, followed by associated additional appellations. The channels that connect the entire structure are likewise labeled to indicate their direction and function. Longer and more pertinent texts are copied into the interstitial spaces as close as possible to the diagrammatic representation of the subject to which they refer. Why represent the divine by means of an arboreal figure? In the first place, the tree was a versatile diagrammatic device with broad, though specialized, applications. It functioned as an information graphic, comparable to a modern Venn diagram, ideally suited to mapping abstract relationships of all kinds, including genealogy. The arboreal scheme attained preeminent status in medieval scientific treatises, particularly in works of natural philosophy, where it was employed, following Porphyry and his commentary on the categories, to visualize scales of classification. The so-called Tree of Porphyry does so by means of a series of dichotomies branching from a central column of perfect symmetry 9. The most abstract and general concept, substance, is located at the top or crown of the tree. It is followed by body, animated body, animal, and man. This same device also served conveniently to map lineages. What at first glance might appear to be a Kabbalistic tree of Sephirot is in fact a tree of Jesse in a mid-14th century French manuscript representing ancestry. Indeed, in certain Kabbalistic manuscripts, the visual and diagrammatic topoi inherited from these arboreal traditions become part of the repertoire used to represent the 10 Sephirot. Thus, the tree functions as an available cultural resource, a graphic language capable of displaying hierarchies, derivations, and dependencies. A key point, however, is that these images must be read not only as trees, but as diagrams whose logic may be based both on branching and on trajectories. The metaphor of roots and branches allows us to distinguish between two ways of representing the divine order. On the one hand, the tree as a genealogical structure, for example, the tree of Jesse. On the other, the tree as a relational scheme that expresses a flow or a chain. In the Ilanot, this flow is usually presented as a movement from Keta to Malkut, a chain of relations that may be described as emanation, descent, or directionality within the diagram, from Keter to Malkut. The Ilanot of the tree of the Sephirot then represent the same thing as the tree, but with a different conceptual charge, and in this latter sense, the term is appropriate. The term Sephirot did not originally refer to the 10 hypostases constitutive of Kabbalistic esotericism. The neologism appears for the first time in the cosmological work of late antiquity, Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, where its primary meaning is that of entities subject to enumeration. The 10 Sephirot, that is, the things counted by the Sefer Yetzirah, are far removed from theosophical Kabbalah, with which they can be reconciled only through a stubborn determination. According to one passage, probably late, in the Sefer Yetzirah, the 10 Sephirot are the two vectors of time, which it calls depth of beginning and depth of end, the two vectors of value, depth of good and depth of evil, and the 6 directions of three-dimensional space, depth of above and depth of below, depth of east and depth of west, depth of north and depth of south. According to another passage, the first 4 are the Spirit of the living God, air derived from the Spirit, water derived from the air, and fire derived from the water. Despite its quasi-biblical status within Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah should not be confused with a mystical book. The term Sephira derives from the multivocal Hebrew root SFR, which encompasses a wide semantic range: to count, to recount, and associations linked to writing. It also resonates with the idea of making shine and with images of things that radiate. Although etymologically distant from the notion of sphere, even from the Greek sphaira in the hypostatic sense of the term, Kabbalah introduced a conceptual transvaluation. Some sephirot came to be conceived as entities forming an integral part of Kabbalistic discourse, while others remained as emanations, atzilut, of the divine essence, atzmut. The latter are more compatible with a philosophical understanding of divine action, but they generated theological tensions within the system of Kabbalistic speculation over the centuries. There is, however, one point that was never the object of controversy or fluctuating consensus. According to the assertion of the Sefer Yetzirah, there were 10 and not 11, not arbitrarily, but necessarily, not 9, but 10 sephirot. And the knowledge that they existed, with their characteristics and paths, constituted the key to unlocking the deepest secrets of nature and of Scripture. If the Porphyrian tree visualizes the gradual descent of ontological categories from the general to the specific, and the tree of Jesse, or any genealogical tree, shows how an ancestral root may come to bear fruit, the Sephirotic tree is the double helix of Kabbalah, which underlies and generates the complete panoply of reality. Not satisfied with a simple chain of being in the Porphyrian manner, the Kabbalists infused the tree with unprecedented implications of fractal fecundity, as we shall soon see. Although its graphic image remained faithful to its origins in natural philosophy, its mental image was more rhizomatic than arboreal. In performative contemplation, the Kabbalist endowed it with aspects within aspects. It was a codification of the infinite. In such performance, anchored in the material image, it was activated in the intermediate plane situated between the spiritual and the corporeal. Kabbalah possesses many secrets, but little mystery. For this reason, more than for any other, the majority of Kabbalists remained reticent towards visual representations. There are rare exceptions from the 10th century in Kabbalistic manuscripts, but even in these cases, the representational ornaments are extraordinarily subtle, as may be observed in a Sephirotic tree with foliage only faintly suggested in an Italian manuscript dated to 1578. It could even be argued that it is the phytomorphization of the diagrams, and not the reverse, that requires explanation given the mismatch between metaphor and scheme. There is an undeniable dissonance between the ascending trajectory from roots to branches proper to the tree as metaphor, and the descending orientation that appears in most applications of the scheme, whether to show the chain of relations from ancestors to descendants, or from Keter to Malkut. The Ilanot, then, represent the divine as a tree of Sephirot. It is appropriate to provide some context for this latter term. The term Sephirot did not originally refer to the 10 hypostases constitutive of Kabbalistic esotericism. The neologism appears for the first time in the cosmological work of late antiquity, Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, where its primary meaning is that of things subject to counting. 8. The 10 Sephirot, that is, the things enumerated by the Sefer Yetzirah, are far removed from Theosophical Kabbalah, with which they can be reconciled only through a stubborn determination. According to one passage, Mishnah, of the Sefer Yetzirah, the 10 Sephirot are the 2 vectors of time, which it calls depth of beginning and depth of end. The 2 vectors of value, depth of good and depth of evil. And the 6 directions of 3-dimensional space, depth of above and depth of below, depth of east and depth of west, depth of north and depth of south. According to another passage, the first 4 are the Spirit of the living God, air derived from the Spirit, water derived from the air, and fire derived from the water, Despite its quasi-biblical status within Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah should not be confused with a Kabbalistic book. Thanks to its multivocal Hebrew root SPR, the term Sephira carries a wide range of meanings and associations, from narrative and counting to connotations linked to splendor and sapphire. It also resonates with the idea of a written thing. Although it does not derive etymologically from sphere, not even from the Greek sphira in the hypostatic sense of the term, the medieval transvaluation of the Sephirot produced divergent interpretations. Some Kabbalists understood them as forming an integral part of the divine essence, Atzmut, while others conceived them as instruments of divine action, Kelim. The latter position was more defensible theologically and philosophically, but over the longue durée of Kabbalistic speculation, it proved to be the less popular. There was, however, one point of universal consensus, thanks to the apodictic pronouncement of the Sefer Yetzirah, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. It was axiomatic that 10 Sephirot existed, and that knowledge of their characteristics and paths constituted the key to unlocking the deepest secrets of nature and of scripture. If the Porphyrian tree visualizes the gradual descent of ontological categories from the general to the specific, and the tree of Jesse, or any genealogical tree, shows how an ancestral root may come to bear fruit, the Sephirotic tree is the double helix of Kabbalah, which underlies and generates the complete panoply of reality. Not satisfied with a meager chain of being traced along Porphyrian lines, the Kabbalists infused the tree with unprecedented implications of fractal fecundity, as we shall soon see. Although its graphic image remained faithful to its origins in natural philosophy, its mental image was more rhizomatic than arboreal. In performative contemplation, the Kabbalist endowed it with aspects and aspects within aspects. It was a codification of infinity. Such performance, anchored in the material image, took place in the intermediate plane situated between the spiritual and the corporeal. Kabbalah has many secrets, but little mystery. For this reason, more than for any other, Kabbalists were cautious with images. For the study of the tree of Jesse, this also offers a salutary warning. Diagrams should not be interpreted solely on the basis of their morphology 10. Why did this scheme prove so congenial to medieval Kabbalists, who appropriated it to visualize, mentally and graphically, the Sephirotic expression of God? In the first place, because this appropriation was consistent with the Kabbalists' self-understanding as men of science devoted to the pursuit of Hokmat HaNistar, the hidden science. 11. This perception was long validated by leading European scientists, as demonstrated by the sustained attention that figures from Marsilio Ficino to Isaac Newton paid to this divine science. 12. It was therefore not accidental that, when diagramming the Sephirotic divine structure, the Kabbalists turned to trees and circles. These schemes were associated with natural philosophy and astronomy, the most prestigious scientific fields of the Middle Ages. Like astronomers, they dealt with, and sought to visualize, the invisible. Trees, however, had an undeniable advantage over circles when it came to representing the divine, and this is the second reason why I consider the scheme to have been adopted so extensively by Kabbalists. Unlike circles, which signified the crystalline spheres they resembled, albeit in 2 dimensions, the arboreal scheme was not an iconic signifier. When used to visualize concepts, from the scale of being to the virtues and the vices, the scheme could easily contrast the central and the peripheral, the primary and the derivative, representing relationships without actually resembling them. This capacity to visualize without asserting morphological similarity constituted an indisputable cartographic advantage in a cultural environment that disapproved of iconic representations of the divine. The relative position within a system could be shown without implying any spatiality. The Kabbalistic tree could be, and indeed was, plausibly defended as a representation of causal, rather than spatial relations. The Sephirotic god was thus imagined through a scheme with a prestigious scientific lineage, devoid of any corporeal charge. It is revealing that, even after the almost canonical conflation of the Sephirotic structure with the arboreal scheme, the latter continued to be drawn with scientific austerity, without any trace of decorative phytomorphic ornamentation. This stands in marked contrast to the arboreal diagrams of medieval Christian visual tradition and of the early modern period, at least from the late 13th century onwards. When Kabbalists sought to indicate hierarchy within the divine order, they invariably arranged the Sephirot one above the other and side by side. Cordovero expresses certain reservations regarding this apparent corporalization of the divine before offering the reassurance that the Ilan, like many other elements of Jewish ritual, is a body destined to clothe a spiritual reality. The Ilan, therefore, fulfills devotional purposes. It is an image presumed capable of rendering its referent immanent and of inviting the contemplative into a journey of imaginal pilgrimage. As we shall see, in medieval Kabbalistic imagination, the Ilan was nothing less than the esoteric image of the tabernacle, a structure conceived to facilitate the divine presence. Up to this point, I have sketched the Ilan with broad strokes, sufficient to encompass a diversity of Kabbalistic opinions and schools of thought. Increasing now the order of magnification, let us divide the Ilanot into two inclusive categories: those that visualize the cosmology of classical Kabbalah and those that visualize that of Lurianic Kabbalah, that is, the body of knowledge associated with Rabbi Isaac Luria, 1534 to 1572. A classical Ilan imagines, and thereby makes present, the divine by mapping it through an arboreal scheme. A Lurianic Ilan, charged with visualizing the dynamic emanative emergence of an exponentially more complex divinity, retains the tree as its fundamental structure, but instead of mapping a stable topography, presents it as a process in motion. The fundamental difference between classical and Lurianic Ilanot may thus be characterized as analogous to that between a synchronic map and a diachronic timeline. Although the Ilanot may be compared to maps or atlases, they are laden with substantially greater content than we usually associate with either of these. Texts are inscribed within the Sephirotic medallions, in the channels that flow between them, in the spaces delineated by the arboreal figure, and in the remaining margins. No less important is the relationship between image and text in an Ilan. The two are mutually interdependent. Together, and only together, they establish the meaning of an Ilan. Finally, far from presenting idealized abstractions of timeless perfection, the Ilanot offer us expressions, often dense and disorderly, of more than half a millennium of cosmological visualization. This visualization and graphic practice took place in cultural contexts as diverse as Italy, Spain, and the Byzantine Empire, Western, Central, and Eastern Europe, Morocco, Tunisia, and Yemen, Iraq, and Kurdistan. The particular cultures of these regions imparted a distinctive color to the Ilanot produced by their Kabbalists. Kabbalists were also part of a diasporic network that brought them into contact with teachers, texts, and traditions from other places. The negotiation between local esoteric traditions, aesthetics, representational conventions, and the knowledge introduced by a constant flow of newly arrived itinerant Jews, many of them bearers of manuscripts and printed books, is often recognizable in the eclectic diversity and in the organization of the material of a given Ilan.
At the outset, and ever since, Kabbalists drew diagrams. Most of these were epistemic images, intended to clarify the texts alongside which they appeared. However important the medium may have been in the constitution of the genre of Ilanot, this genre would not exist were it not for an older and continuous tradition of visual thinking and diagrammatic drawing among Kabbalists. The images that Kabbalists produced in order to visualize their knowledge formed part of the repertoire of those who later produced the Ilanot. The arboreal scheme may gradually have assumed a privileged position, but concentric circles, tables, and a wide range of other schemata were also employed. An examination of the earliest Kabbalistic diagrams does more than introduce us to the iconographic repertoire of the Kabbalists. It offers an opportunity to appreciate the importance of metaphor and medium in the constitution of the genre. Although appropriated from medieval science, the arboreal device was, and remains, a tree, and the question of its possible relationship to trees of folklore, mythology, and religion must at least be raised. The earliest Kabbalists retained the ancient biblical and rabbinic presumption that it was the human form that primarily expressed resemblance to God. The two options, of course, were compatible. How do we know that a person is called a tree? Asks Rabbi Yehuda in the Zohar 3:24a. The answer is derived from Deuteronomy 20:19. For man is the tree of the field. The interchangeability of the human and the arboreal in the rabbinic imagination facilitated their implicit conflation in the Kabbalistic tree, in which we often see body parts labeled alongside Sephirotic names, or the tree as a whole seated upon a representation of the throne of glory. The divine, the human, and the tree thus form an isomorphic triangle within Jewish tradition. In the earliest centuries of Kabbalistic creativity, however, the tree was only one metaphor among many used to imagine the divinity. When it was employed, the emphasis lay more on fecundity than on structure. Jews were, of course, deeply familiar with the trees, or according to some rabbinic opinions, with a single tree of the Garden of Eden. As the Genesis narrative has tempted its readers for millennia, eating from the tree of life is tantamount to becoming like God. Jews were undoubtedly fascinated by this foundational story, not least because of the questions it raised concerning human potential. Nevertheless, I would suggest that the Jewish exegetical tradition was more interested in the moral questions posed by the story than in any particular obsession with the tree or trees themselves. When the rabbis of the Talmud discuss the species of the tree from which Adam and Eve ate, their three answers, vine, fig tree, and wheat, serve merely as points of departure for homiletic assertions. The tree of life occupies a more prominent place in Christian religious imagination than in Jewish thought. According to a well-known legend, the wood of the cross was fashioned from its trunk. This association may have contributed to the undeniable and disproportionate attention paid to the Kabbalistic tree by those Christians who took an interest in Kabbalah over the centuries. Kabbalists used arboreal metaphors without confusing them with the arboreal scheme, even when metaphor and diagram appear side by side. If there existed any Jewish tradition of the tree of life that ultimately emerged as the Kabbalistic tree, they knew nothing of it. The Ilanot deploy the visual language and diagrammatic repertoire of the Kabbalistic milieu in which the genre emerged. It is significant that the two earliest surviving Kabbalistic manuscripts, copied in 1284 and 1286, from Spanish manuscripts that had arrived in Italy shortly beforehand, contain numerous diagrams, including autonomous diagrams. The notion that an inscribed diagrammatic image might constitute an independent work in its own right thus dates back to the origins. Although these miscellanies present an eclectic selection of esoteric works rather than diagrams intended to clarify specific passages of the treatises, The images were copied into the spaces between the texts. A wide variety of schemata is displayed in these manuscripts. In the Codex of 1284, we find the 10 Sephirot configured as a chariot wheel, positioned almost exactly where we would later expect them to appear. This visualization of the network arranges 8 Sephirot on the outer rim, symmetrically ordered, with the remaining 2 placed at the center and on the lower vertical radius. The Sephirah of Tiferet, beauty, occupies the axial point, signaling its special status in the theosophical doctrine of the Kabbalist who conceived it. Malkut, the lower Sephirah, appears deliberately weighted downward at 6 o'clock. It too was fundamentally distinct from the others. All the medallions are inscribed with the customary theosophical names of the Sephirot, to which the names of their associated biblical patriarchs have been added. The circular morphology of the scheme was probably intended to evoke an axiomatic phrase from the Sefer Yetzirah, section 6. Its end is fixed in its beginning. The Codex of 1286, for its part, presents 2 rotae, or circular diagrams, of the Sephirot. These diagrams became widely known through their inclusion in the foundational treatise Me'orat Einayim, Illumination of the Eyes, composed by the celebrated Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac of Acre, late 13th to mid-14th century. The first is designed to set out the correspondences between the Sephirot, the 10 Commandments, the planetary spheres, the human body, and the 10 utterances of creation. These correspondences could have been displayed by means of a simple table. The diagram is, in effect, a table, but one whose form conveys a message as significant as the data it organizes. 1-2. Kabbalists would have rejected being characterized as mystics. They often conceived the Sephirotic tree in mechanistic terms, employing technical language we usually associate with the hard sciences. A kind of hydraulic system of interconnected nodes, each dominated by an essential quality yet simultaneously containing all 10. The Sephirot are interconnected by Zinarot, channels, through which flows the Shefa, divine abundance. Any aspect of reality may be read as the expression of a unique recombination of trajectories of Shefa within the tree. No less important is the presumption that the tree constitutes the dynamically responsive substratum of reality. This is the meaning of theurgy in the Kabbalistic context, the belief that human action, including thought, affects the functioning of this underlying structure. Tikkun, the rectification or intensification that constitutes the ultimate aim of human activity, informed by Kabbalistic ideals, is fundamentally the intentional contribution to the restoration of the integrity of the Sephirotic tree. Rather than relating to Tikkun in the generalized terms so common today, think positively and the universe will respond, Kabbalists demanded of themselves a rigorous mode of life, attentive to every act and its anticipated consequence. Jewish life, in all its details, was a laboratory. Scientists working in laboratories are required to act with precision. The subjective experience of the technician is rarely relevant to experimental work, whose processes and results are objective. Kabbalistic discourse is characterized, with few exceptions, by an analogous attitude towards the divine and its tikkun. The structure of the divine, an expression that gives its title to the earliest systematic Kabbalistic treatise, Mi'areket HaElohut, is known as is the work required for its maintenance, repair, and perfection. Unrolling an Ilan inscribed on a parchment scroll is a mimetic act. It amounts to enacting intra-divine emanation in its ideal state. The mimesis that adheres to the specific material text of the Ilan merely amplifies the dynamic described by Elliot R. Wolfson, according to which a key aspect of Kabbalistic aesthetics is that one who imaginatively contemplates the Sephirotic emanations emulates the divine process of autogenesis. An Ilan may map the real, relational, or ontological structure of the divinity, and at the same time serve as a tool designed to effect its tikkun. In doing so, it exploits the diagrammatic potential of its schemata to facilitate the organization, representation, and production of knowledge. Its nonlinear texts are read in relation to these schemata. Unlike a conventional treatise, the conceptual content of an Ilan is represented spatially, revealing complex yet ordered fields of meaning. This spatial presentation is key to its mnemonic and pedagogical utility, as it favors the absorption of the content inscribed in loco. This process should not be confused with simple, passive memorization. From execution to enactment, the Kabbalistic tree does not merely display information, it produces the knowledge it traces. We are not speaking, however, of a mere alternative vehicle for the transmission and generation of knowledge, for the Ilan is, perhaps above all, a devotional instrument. Kabbalists, like all traditional Jews, pray 3 times a day. Rather than modifying the liturgy, they expand it through kavanot, intentions, which in this context means mapping the elements of prayer onto the Sephirotic tree. For the words of the prayer to accomplish their work, they must be intentionalized with the corresponding sephira in mind. Rabbi Moses Cordovero, 1522 to 1570, the greatest Kabbalist of 16th century Saft until his death and arguably beyond, validates the Ilan as the form of the Sephirot that should be visualized during the act of prayer. The Kabbalists, he writes, have drawn Ilanot and engraved them as forms. These forms have been established in the hearts as the image of the celestial spheres. The second diagram adopts a more iconic approach, representing the Sephirot as cosmic spheres. At first glance, this representation reveals the implication of the Sephirot in the very structure of the cosmos, alongside other principles governing reality. Although a rectangular table would have been easier to study, the message conveyed by the scheme was as significant as the data it organized. Closer inspection shows that each of the nested forms is a letter, formed by the initials of the 10 Sephirot. The outermost is the Kaf of Keter, the innermost the Mem of Malkut. The arrangement of many of these forms is intended to suggest circularity or even sphericity. The Kabbalists adopted from astronomers a metaphor that compared the structure of the cosmos to the layers of an onion. This is the earliest graphic visualization of that Kabbalistic appropriation, and over time it became one of the most frequently reproduced in the history of Kabbalah. We shall encounter it again in the Lurianic Ilanot analyzed below. The two miscellanies share a single diagram in common, labeled Ilan HaHokmah, Tree of Wisdom/Science. When I first encountered it, it reminded me more of Darwin's Tree of Evolution than of a variation or a precursor of the Sephirotic tree. Indeed, it is not a Sephirotic tree, at least not in the Kabbalistic sense of the Sephirot. This Ilan HaHokmah is rather a visualization of the cosmological core of the Sefer Yetzirah 15. 2 passages from the Sefer Yetzirah account for most of its details. Sefer Yetzirah paragraph on altar. These are the 10 Sephirot of Belima. 1. The Spirit of the Living God. 2. air from spirit. 3. Water from air. 4. Fire from water. And 5 to 10. Height above and below, east and west, north and south. Sefer Yetzirah, paragraph 47. 12 diagonal lines, radiating towards the 6 faces of a cube, separating in every direction. The southeast line, the upper east line, the lower east line, the lower north line, the northwest line, the upper north line, the lower west line, the upper west line, the lower west line, the lower south line, the upper south line, and they expand continuously forever and ever. And they are the arms of the universe. The diagram, intended to be read from bottom to top, begins with a circle/sphere divided into 10 and labeled "It is one." As the inscription immediately above confirms, this is the one of one, the Spirit of the living God. As the source of all things, the 10 Sephirot exist potentially within this sphere, hence its internal division. The node located immediately above on the central axis is labeled air from spirit. The other elements and their derivations, water from air and fire from water, are inscribed beneath the lower and upper horizontal lines of the central figure. These are the first 4 things counted, or Sephirot, as the term is used in Sefer Yetzirah, section 16. The remaining 6 Sephirot are the 6 facets of cubic space: height above and below, east and west, north and south. These vectors of infinite extension are likewise inscribed under the heading "The 6 Extremities." The Sephirot of the Ilan HaHochma therefore have nothing to do with the Sephirot in the Kabbalistic sense of the term. It is not surprising, then, that the Ilan HaHochma never entered the diagrammatic repertoire of later Kabbalists. Although it bears no obvious trace of Kabbalistic theosophy, the Ilan HaHochma constitutes the earliest surviving visualization of an esoteric tree in Jewish sources. Understanding its visual language thus falls squarely within the scope of the present chapter and promises to sharpen our sensitivity to the ways in which figures of this kind operate. A few key points suffice to show that a careful reading of this tree is rewarded with insights of surprisingly broad implication. The strangely shaped central figure is a cuboid, a cube-like form with edges of unequal length, represented in plane. That is, as it appears when unfolded onto a single surface. Its 12 straight lines are its edges. The 8 lines radiating from its central node establish its 8 vertices. These lines running from center to corners are not static objects of modern geometry. Rather, they are tracings of movements in time, according to pre-modern Neoplatonic geometries, which defined lines as unfolding from a single point. Although the central figure possesses the vertices and edges of a cuboid, it displays only 5 faces. In this, it accords with other medieval planar representations of cubic figures, such as the celebrated images of the Celestial City, associated with medieval Hispanic manuscripts of Betis, which typically leave the 6th face open. This open 6th face corresponds to our viewpoint from above. It should also be noted that east has been placed at the top of the planar image. This cartography of the Sefer Yetzirah thus shares the orientation of contemporary Mappae Mundi, including the map of Hereford, Mappa Mundi, produced around 1300. The centering of Jerusalem in those Mappae Mundi may find its parallel here in the central node that establishes the Z axis of above and below. Despite its resemblance to a folded container, The central figure does not fold into a cube with equal edges, either as a mental exercise or when printed and physically manipulated. If its vertices and edges were intended to suggest cubicity, its form appears rather to be a representational allusion to the divine throne. The image may thus have been inspired by Sefer Yetzirah, Section 4. Establish the thing in its proper place and return the Creator to his throne. The Sefer Yetzirah divides the Hebrew alphabet into 3 groups: 3 mother letters, 7 double letters, and 12 simple letters. Each of these groups finds an indexical expression in the diagram. The group of 3 corresponds to the 3 labeled elements: air, water, and fire. The 7 doubles appear to be the principal referent of the 7-branched tree with its duplicated nodes. The 12 simples correspond to the edges of the cube. The 7-branched tree that emerges from the cube displays exactly 68 nodes. The significance of this detail was clear to the copyists, who reproduced it with remarkable precision. Moreover, 5 nodes play no role in the constitution of the cube. 2 have been added near the ends of the lower horizontal line, a 3rd at its center, a 4th above the line of air from spirit, and a 5th at the center of the lower sphere. The sum of 68 plus 5 is thus encoded in the Ilan ha-Hokmah. The gematria, numerical value of Hokmah, in turn is 73. The correspondence between this indexical feature of the diagram and the gematria of Hokmah is indicated by the added markings. Bringing together these different levels of analysis reveals that the Ilan ha-Hokmah is a sophisticated visualization of the cosmological core of the Sefer Yetzirah. Neoplatonic geometries are ingeniously combined with iconic and indexical signifiers to form a uniquely integrated image. The ambition of the Ilan ha-Hokmah recalls the homonymous work of Ramon Lull of 1295, Arbor Scientiae. Lull's celebrated treatise likewise relies on diagrammatic illustrations. The characterization offered by Gerhard Ladner of Lull's trees could equally be applied to the Ilan ha-Hokmah. They were not merely logical schemata, they were, above all, ontological representations. They symbolized the degrees of being. The similarity suggests familiarity, or at least parallel activity, by kindred minds within the Hispanic intellectual milieu. Although it is not a Kabbalistic tree proper, understanding the Ilan ha-Hokmah sheds light on the ways in which esoteric cosmology was graphically encoded in the milieu, within which the hypostatic sephirotic system was then taking shape. The earliest Kabbalistic tree, though imagined rather than drawn, is the demiurgic tree All of the Bahir, a 12th century Provençal text that precedes fully articulated sephirotic theosophy. In the Bahir, God describes the tree he has planted. I am he who has planted this tree, Ilan, so that the whole world may delight in it. With it, I have encompassed the All, and I have called it Kol, All. For upon it, the All depends, and from it, the All emanates. All things need it, behold it, and long for it, and from it all souls take flight. I was alone when I made it, and no angel can rise above it. Who was with me that I should entrust this secret to him? 29. This astonishing text makes no reference whatsoever to the Sephirot. Yet another passage of the Bahir seems to understand the tree All in terms that anticipate a Sephirotic arrangement. What is this tree, Ilan, of which you speak? He replied, "All the powers of the Holy One, blessed be He, are one upon another, and resemble a tree." 30. This second passage, possibly later, may indicate the emergence of a novel Sephirotic cosmology, thus becoming an intra-Bahir Kabbalistic commentary. The tree all is described in demiurgic and literal terms. In the commentary, by contrast, the tree has become a metaphor particularly well suited to describing the structure of powers arranged in series. Could the author of this passage already have had a Kabbalistic tree in mind? With the divine powers visualized as an arboreal hierarchy, the text undoubtedly marks a significant and influential milestone. Rabbi Moses de Leon, circa 1240 to 1305, for example, repeatedly invokes the tree all, referring to it as the tree from which all souls fly, and as the tree bounded by the 12 diagonals. In these passages, the diagonals probably refer rather to the cosmological expansion visualized in the Ilan HaHokmah. Even so, for the Kabbalists of this period, Ilan was a term that could be used to refer to the complete set of the 10 Sephirot, a usage indeed found in Zoharic literature. By around 1300, Kabbalists had made considerable efforts to develop the ideas that had been gestating during the previous century and to systematize them with unprecedented coherence. Treatises of this period often render this process particularly visible, perhaps nowhere more clearly than when they address the question of how the Sephirotic arrangement ought to be visualized. When confronting that question, epistemic images were employed to clarify the options under consideration. Proposals are set side by side, and competing arrangements are established exclusively by words. The names of the Sephirot are arranged hierarchically from top to bottom, divided into left, right, and center. As with Porphyrian trees, in Christian manuscripts of the same period, there are no medallions, although in some witnesses, lines are used to connect the words. Isaac of Acres' Me'irat Einayim is not a systematic introduction to Kabbalah. It rather takes the form of a super-commentary, devoted primarily to disentangling the Kabbalistic allusions scattered throughout Rabbi Moses, Ben Nachman's commentary on the Torah, known as Nachmanides, 1194 to 1270. Nachmanides, who may justly be described as the most influential rabbi of his time, chose what Daniel Abrams calls a double strategy to elevate the status of his own Kabbalah and at the same time to conceal its esoteric content carefully. The esoteric charge of these themes was so intense that even the authors of super commentaries, whose task consisted precisely in exposing what Nachmanides had preferred to veil, were extremely cautious about revealing too much. Yet from what these authors do allow to be seen, it is clear what role they attributed to these devices in channeling divine effusion and in making the divine present, in a sense almost of face-to-face. These valences, together with the juxtaposition of the verse that initiated the profound exploration of Sephirotic structure, undoubtedly inspired the almost universal incorporation of images of the table and the menorah in classical Ilanot. The passage that served as the springboard for the treatment of Sephirotic structure in the commentaries on Nachmanides, Me'irat Einayim, among the principal examples, is far from an obvious choice. It is an apparently innocuous verse enumerating terms related to the tabernacle courtyard. The cardinal directions east, west, north, and south appear alongside the term yam, sea, and kedma, forward, Exodus 27:13. It is at this point that Nachmanides introduces a surprisingly discreet observation concerning the difference between names, shemot, and appellations, Kinuyim. His explanation is clear and coherent with the plain sense of the text. Few would dispute that in the land of Israel, the appellation sea is used to refer to the west. But something more is occurring here. After all, it is the tabernacle that is being described in these verses, and its nominal coordinates encode the supra-celestial structure. Maimonides confines himself to a slight hint, and the secret of these names is known from the work of the celestial chariot, Mima'ase ha-Merkava ha-Elyona, 47. That hint was enough to set the super-commentators in motion. Thus, Rabbi Shem Tov Ibn Gaon's gloss on the phrase known from the work of the celestial chariot says the following: "Know that the east is Abraham, the west is Isaac, the south is Jacob, and the north is David." And concerning the chariot, the sages said, "Michael at its right, Gabriel at its left." For in Ezekiel's chariot, they are arranged according to their descending progression, Hishtalshalutim. The south is also called right, and the north left. Therefore, I shall hint to you its form. Hermos, Leka, Zuratan. 48. Ibn Gaon, circa 1270 to circa 1330, then offers a diagram that closely resembles the leftmost option in the set shown in Figure 10. Isaac of Acre validates his own lengthy excursus on the Sephirotic arrangement by invoking this precedent. Having seen that this sage, Ibn Gaon, wrote in his book Keter Shem Tov, Crown of a Good Name, the form of the standing of the Sephirot, Zurat ha-Amadat ha-Sephirot, in Kabbalah, I considered it appropriate to treat this matter, to compose words and to draw forms, Lazayer Zurot, that illuminate the eyes of the intellect. 49. In the course of his treatment of the form of the standing of the Sephirot, Isaac presents 4 Sephirotic diagrams, each of which, according to him, has something to teach. The first appears in his incorporation of Ibn Gaon's gloss as a prologue to his own more extensive development. In Isaac's version, the diagram corresponds to the rightmost option in the set of Figure 10 rather than the left. Instead of presenting the 3 upper Sephirot in triangulation, Isaac aligns them on the central axis. This correction accords with a position associated with the treatise Ma'areket Ha-Elohut, the structure of the divine, composed around 1300 by an anonymous Kabbalist of the Girona school, according to which the sublimity of the degree of the 3 Sephirot and their hiddenness place them beyond the faculties of human cognition and beyond dispositions of right or left. Rather, it is appropriate to unify them in a single unification, perfect, balanced, and simple, in order to allude to their unity. Note that this passage treats the placement of the Sephirot in specific dispositions as symbolic rather than iconic. In other words, it argues that the drawing of the constellation of the Sephirot, or at least of its highest dimension, is not determined by supposed real locations, but by the idea symbolized by a given configuration. Triangulation implies differentiation accessible to human perception in the upper stratum of divinity. A vertical aligned tower suggests the opposite. This rejection of the implicit assertion of the ontological reality of the Sephirot and of the iconic resemblance of the Kabbalistic tree to what it represents evidences more an awareness of the problem than a consistent and fully applied position. It might be argued that by restricting the debate to the 3 upper Sephirot, even those who favored the aligned vertical tower left open the possibility that the lower seven were indeed susceptible to human apprehension and to representation by iconic signifiers. The second and third diagrams of Isaac are introduced as part of his treatment of questions related to Sephirotic differentiation and interconnection. If the 10 Sephirot were unique essential qualities, it would be impossible to explain their mutual implication. For this reason, Isaac conceives them as interconnected, each containing the others. The super commentary provided Isaac of Acre with an ideal structure for organizing Kabbalistic secrets that he gathered and systematized after arriving in Spain around 1305, including those preserved by disciples of Nahmanides who had also written super commentaries, even if only speculatively, revealing a little more than their master had considered prudent to put in writing. Like other super commentators, Isaac treated Sephirotic structure in the pericope Terumah, Exodus 25, 1-27, 19. This passage of the Torah has a single subject, the tabernacle. Why is it precisely there that we find exhaustive discussions of Sephirotic structure? It may be argued that the plain sense of the text is already suggestive, for in it, God offers Moses visual rather than verbal instruction. You shall make this tabernacle and all its vessels exactly according to the model tabernacle that I show you. Exodus 25:9. It is in this precinct that, scarcely a verse earlier, God had promised to dwell in the midst of Israel. Opening his treatment of this pericope, Nahmanides affirms the fundamental parity between Sinai and the tabernacle as revelatory portals, emphasizing the divine presence that both facilitate. In his first comment on this section, Nahmanides identifies the many constitutive elements that Sinai and the tabernacle share. The latter replicates and miniaturizes the former, with a key difference. Whereas divine revelation at Sinai was exoteric, God's presence in the tabernacle was esoteric. The secret of the tabernacle is that the glory kavod that dwelt Shakan on Mount Sinai dwells within it in hiddenness, Barnestar. It is significant that, unlike most of Nahmanides' comments that were expanded by his super commentators, in which the master explicitly signaled the existence of a Kabbalistic secret, this initial comment presents itself as Pishat, the contextual and literal reading of the biblical text. Rabbi Yehoshua ibn Shuaib, circa 1280 to circa 1340, a disciple of Nahmanides' principal student, Rabbi Shlomo ibn Adret, 1235 to 1310, formulated the following generalization of the master's position. The Torah's intention regarding the tabernacle and the temple is to hint, remez, at supracelestial matters. And all the drawings, ziurai, of the tabernacle and the temple are drawings of spiritual realities. This characterization is confirmed by somewhat more explicit statements by Nachmanides outside the biblical commentary, as in his Torat HaAdam, the teaching of the human being, where he writes, the tabernacle and the arrangement of everything within it, and the drawings of the cherubim, all serve to understand the secrets of the operations of the supracelestial, sephirotic, intermediate, celestial, and lower sublunar world. There are hints there to the entire chariot. 43. This group of Kabbalists accordingly paid special attention to the cherubim of the ark, wrought of hammered gold, as well as to the table of the bread of the presence, lihem hapanim, and the menorah, the great lampstand, placed respectively to the north and to the south. Before them, sephirotic contemplation became a directed practice. Before you is the form of the 10 sephirot in the manner we have described. If you contemplate the form of their arrangement with depth, wondrous secrets will be revealed to you if you have received imkibalta. Truly, the eyes of your flesh and the eyes of your intellect see that each of the 10 sephirot comprises judgment and mercy. Isaac's fourth and final diagram is a modified version of the first. The tower remains as it was, but the right-left triangulations beneath it have been inverted. Pardad, fear, as din, judgment, an alternative name for the Sephira more commonly known as Gevura, power, and Hod, majesty, are on the right, while Gedula, greatness, an alternative name for Hesed, benevolence, and Netzah, endurance, are on the left. It was axiomatic that the right was the side of love, the left that of its sinister opposite. Yet far from dismissing this strange inversion of the scheme, Isaac emphatically affirms its legitimacy. He does so with a clever play on words. Anyone who says that this structure, Tavnit, is inverted, Mehupeket, belongs to the perverse generation, Dort Dahapukot, from whom God will hide his face according to Deuteronomy 32:20. Isaac defends this particular visualization of the Kabbalistic tree because, unlike the others, it captures the divine from the divine perspective. The standard tree, showing Hesed to the viewer's right and Gevurah to the left, presents God from behind, so to speak. Isaac preferred a heraldic view of the sephirotic arrangement. What seemed to be an image that put everything backwards was, when properly understood, a true vision of encounter with the divine. For Isaac, the correct visualization of the Sephirot was not a mere visual representation, but an active invocation of the divine. Here, the act of prayer becomes a mystical process of transformation that depends on the intention behind the prayer, and not only on the words. In his excursus, Isaac concludes with the final moments of the central section of the daily liturgy, the famous prayer of the 18 blessings, or the Amida, standing prayer. The customary practice is to take 3 steps forward at the beginning of this recitation and 3 steps back at its conclusion, followed by bows to the left and to the right. Despite his philosophical and anti-anthropomorphic sensibilities, Maimonides, 1138 to 1204, explained these bows as follows. Why does the worshipper first bow to the left? Because his left corresponds to the right of the person he faces. And just as one standing before a king bows first to the king's right and then to his left, the sages ordained that, upon concluding the Amida, the same etiquette be observed as when one takes leave of the royal presence. Isaac's God, now imagined in Sephirotic terms, maintains a fundamental fidelity to this ethic. The enlightened who receive the face of the Shekinah say Shalom, peace, and incline their head to the left, to the right of the Shekinah, and then again say Shalom, and incline their head to the right, to the left of the Shekinah. Whoever has received the path of truth when saying Shalom directs his attention, Mekavan, toward the supernatural in order to draw blessing and peace from the first cause to the final cause. The 10 Sephirot must always be before his eyes, united in true unity. It is interesting to note that throughout this long discussion of the Sephirotic schemata, Isaac never uses the language of diagram. He refers to them as zurot, forms, a term with Platonic associations, which the Kabbalist must draw, lizayer. This versatile verb here serving primarily in the mental contemplative sense rather than the graphic diagrammatic. Isaac also makes frequent use of the term tavnit, with connotations of form and structure, as Maimonides had warned in his Guide of the Perplexed 1.3, where he notes that the term should not be applied to God because it implies the physicality of the object in question. For example, being square, circular, and so forth. Isaac's usage is grounded in the fact that Maimonides had cited the plan of the chariot, Tavnit HaMerkava, 1 Chronicles 28:18, in his first comment on the pericope. Let us recall that this entire excursus was born from Maimonides' hint to the work of the celestial chariot as the key to understanding the secrets of the tabernacle texts. Isaac was not reluctant to imagine the Sephirot as a tree. On the contrary, throughout Me'arat Einayim, he delighted in using a diverse range of metaphors to bring readers towards an appreciation of their nature. He compared them to chains of being, springs of water, gems, burning coals, and clusters of grapes. But above all, he saw them as a tree. Isaac tells us that his Kabbalistic teachers taught him the allegory, mashal, of the tree, Ilan, which allegorizes the Sephirot as a tree whose roots are singularly in the earth, thereby alluding to the 10 Sephirot that are singularly in the infinite, Ein Sof. The tree has twigs and branches, arms and shoots, some fruits and some husks, leaves and seeds. All are drawn one from another, this from that, and all are drawn from the central line, Kav Ha'imya, that is within. Everything comes from the root, and everything is one in a unity without eternal division. For everything is in the tree. All are nourished from a single source. Gikatilla wrote Sha'arei Orah as an introduction to Kabbalah, referring here to the Sephirot, a perennial favorite. This text represents the apex of the genre of commentaries on the Sephirot. Its clear and attractive style made it very popular with readers from the outset, including Christians. In 1516, Paulus Ricus, 1480 to 1541, a German convert to Christianity, published a paraphrastic translation entitled Portae Lucis, making it the first printed Kabbalistic work. Its often reproduced title page, executed by Leonhard Beck, depicts an elderly man, perhaps Paulus Ricus, holding a Sephirotic tree by the channel connecting Yesod with Malkut. The tree depicted in this iconic image, however, was inspired neither by Gikatilla's text nor by the most significant diagram of the original Hebrew work. If anything, it appears to be an inversion of a 12th century image of the Lady Dialectic, Dialectica Domina, presenting the tree of porphyry, or something similar. This image may be understood as a visual argument for Kabbalah, as a kind of philosophia perennis, thus linking the ancient philosopher with the Kabbalistic tree of porphyry. Rickes's Porte Lucis did not include a reproduction of Gikatila's Sephirotic diagram, yet this micrographically formed figure was copied with astonishing consistency in Hebrew manuscripts and printed editions over the centuries. From a representational perspective, Gikatila's diagram is ambiguous. With its balanced symmetry, it might resemble a lampstand, a set of scales, a human figure, or a tree. Gikatila designed the diagram as an epistemic image intended to clarify his discussion of Tiferet, which he, like Isaac, regarded as the central line, Hakav ha'imiyai, of the Sephirotic arrangement. Tiferet was literally central to Gikatila's understanding of Kabbalah. As he wrote in his introduction, Tiferet is the tetragrammaton, the true name of God, and all the other biblical divine names, which he equated with the Sephirot, are in its orbit. Conceptually, this idea recalls the 1284 wheel diagram in the Paris manuscript, but Gikatila has more to say. The entire Sephirotic arrangement may be represented as the tetragrammaton, YHVH. Keter is the thorn of the Yud, that is, its calligraphic crown. Hokmah is the letter Yud. Binah the first He. The 6 Sephirot, from Hesed to Yesod, are the Vav, and Malkut is the final He. In this framework, Tiferet, as the heart of the central complex of 6 Sephirot, becomes its metonymy and is therefore uniquely associated with the Vav. The morphology of the letter Vav, 1, a straight line, is suited to the sephira that encapsulates the central line of the structure. It is in this context that the tree appears, but only as a passing metaphor. The central line is like the trunk of the tree, Keguf ha'ilan. For the most part, however, Gikatila emphasizes geometric ideals of balance and proportionality. Thus, even the letter Vav, in its extended version, as a vertical figure, is intended as a symbol of equilibrium, of visual symmetry. Rabbi Matityahu Delakrut, who was one of the editors of the first published Sha'arei Ora, addresses a question related to Tiferet that remained unresolved in Gikatila's text: the precise location of its analog, the quasi-sephira of De'at, knowledge. This problem did not trouble Gikatila, but for Delakrut, structural questions could not be ignored entirely, even in a beginner's book. According to Delakrut, such dilemmas could be resolved by consulting the drawings of Ilanot, drawn by masters of Kabbalah. To this comment, Delakrut added a modest arboreal diagram of his own. In doing so, he reinforced a passage in his general introduction, where he presents the reader with a drawing of the Sephirot for reference. Here is their drawing, Ziyuran, in the order of their progression, Hishtal Shelutan, and their branching, Hista Afutam, resembling a tree, Ki Dimyon Ha'ilan, in its branches and divisions. And this is what they call an Ilan of Kabbalah, Ilan HaKabbalah. Delakrut's use of the term Ilan/OT and his reference to what they call an Ilan makes it clear that by his time, the usage was already well established. In that same introduction, Delakrut recommends that students study Ma'areket HaElohut after completing Sha'arei Ora. The Ma'areket, as it is commonly called, was the first systematic presentation of a mature and integrated Kabbalistic system. If one looks back over the literary remains of Kabbalistic and proto-Kabbalistic speculation from the preceding period, one finds a multitude of approaches. Incipient notions of the Sephirot abound, but a fully consolidated theosophy is not yet in place. The Ma'areket represents a bold turn in the history of Kabbalistic discourse, a deliberately anonymous and synthetic in the integrative sense voice that silences the particular voices of the historical Kabbalists of earlier centuries and even, possibly, the Zoharic literature. Kabbalah has been systematized, its theosophy presented with an unprecedented scope and methodological rigor. Entire chapters of the Ma'areket are devoted to discussing the graphic arrangement of the Sephirot. The treatment of their structure and visualization begins in chapter 7, entitled Ma'areket Ha-Seder, the structure of the order of the Sephirot. The Ma'areket is entirely unambiguous regarding the purpose of these discussions, to establish the correct image of the Sephirotic constellation. The image is not accidental, but essential to the matter at hand. The importance of its graphic realization, the Ziyur, drawing, is underscored by repeated calls for the reader to contemplate the drawn image on the page. Concluding a detailed discussion, the author declares that the structure resembles this form, Zot Hazura. The diagram that follows once again resembles the right-hand option, with the three upper Sephirot aligned vertically. Once the constellation is established, Chapter 8 of the Ma'areket turns to its interpretation. The metaphors of the text are predominantly anthropomorphic. The Sephirotic arrangement accords with the human structure, Binyan Adam. In a rhetorical gesture that perhaps suggests awareness of a schematic affinity with the genealogical tree, we are also told that the upper Sephirot are the cosmic fathers, Avot Olam, and that those below are called sons of the fathers. Soon, however, human and arboreal metaphors blend. The fathers are like the roots of the tree, Keshoshe Ha'ilan, the principal part of the structure, Ikar HaBinyan, and the sons are like the branches. Yet only the branches produce fruit. That is, only the sons and not the fathers are worthy to sustain the world. But there is no existence for the branch without its root. Having invested in this powerful metaphor, the Ma'areket continues without effort by recalling the cosmic all-tree of the Bahir. Nevertheless, in general, anthropomorphic discourse dominates. A Zoharic comment, however, complicates matters. If the tree represents the Sephirot in the correct order, how is one to harmonize it with a text of the Zohar that demands the inversion of the positions of Netzah and Hod? Here, the question of perspective is introduced once again. I found no other solution than to say that one who approaches his fellow finds his right opposite the other's left, and his left opposite the other's right. Thus, Netzah, as drawn in the Ilan, is on our right, which is the left of the Holy One, blessed be He. And Hod is the right of the Holy One, blessed be He, and our left. Of course, the common Ilan, to which appeal is repeatedly made, did not represent such a perspective. Its right side was unquestionably God's. And if Netzah and Hod were relatively indeterminate Sephirot, and therefore reversible, those above, Hesed and Din, benevolence and judgment, had to be associated with right and left, respectively. To express the divine perspective, the entire Ilan would have to be turned 180 degrees on its vertical axis, right and left as dexter and sinister. But did such an exceptional Ilan ever exist? The answer takes us beyond the scheme and into the genre. And I testify that in an Italian city called Reggio, I saw an Ilan in the possession of an understanding man that was drawn in this way, inverted, and they told me that a great man had made it. It is unlikely that this was a diagram in a codex like those of Me'arat Einayim, but rather an Ilan on parchment, a specimen of the genre. Its lineage attributed to a great man, implied that this mirror image of the prevailing tree could not be dismissed as a mere mistake by an ignoramus. More importantly, it allowed the author to assert that even when it seemed to contradict itself, the Zohar was never wrong, if correctly understood. Even when it appeared to contradict itself, the Zohar was never wrong, if properly understood. Ilanot became the common name of the genre over the course of the 15th century, gradually replacing Yeriot, literally sheets/leaves. This latter synecdoche was anchored in the materiality of the artifacts, but it also carried celestial associations, recalling Psalm 104:2, where the Lord stretches out the heavens like a tent or like a curtain, Yeriah, a verse ubiquitous in Kabbalistic sources. It also evoked the famous saying of Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai, 1st century CE, cited in the Talmudic tractate on scribal arts, Masechet Sopharim 16:8. If all the heavens were parchment, Yeriah, and all the trees, Ilanot pens, and all the seas ink, it would not suffice to write the wisdom I learned from my teachers. Cordovero elaborated the symbolic meaning of Yeriah in his Pardes Rimonim, Orchard of Pomegranates, explaining that the matter of the Yeriah is the secret of the expansion of the central Sephirah, Tiferet, an assertion that must be understood in the light of Psalm 104:2. Here, a Tiferet-centric conception of the Sephirotic tree reappears with real graphic consequences. Such associations allow him to declare that, in fact, each Sephirah could be called Yeriah. The fact that preparing parchment requires a period of stretching the skin also favored this expansive association. The identification of the arboreal scheme with the parchment sheet was so complete that it was also possible to refer to an arboreal diagram on a codex page as a Yeriah. Thus, in Igarit Hahamudot, the Precious Letter, a work by the Italian Kabbalist Rabbi Eliyahu Hayim ben Binyamin of Genazzano, circa 1440 to circa 1510, the author's own diagram of the Sephirotic tree is introduced as follows. And here for you is the drawing, Ziyur, of the Yeriah. These terminologies appear to have been coined with Ilanot specifically in mind in the circle of the 14th century Italian Kabbalist Rabbi Reuven Sarfati, or Zarfati, an early commentator on the Ma'araket. Two of his works are revealingly entitled Perush HaYeriah HaGedolah, Commentary on the Great Parchment, and Perush HaYeriah HaKetana, Commentary on the Small Parchment. Textual variants between copies confirm the interchangeability of Yeriah and Ilan by the middle of the 15th century. Around 1550, a Venetian scribe who copied Sarfati's Perush HaYeriah HaGedolah from a parchment into a miscellaneous codex explained, "This is from a parchment sheet, Yeriah, called Ilan, and I copied the account Sipur written in each Sephirah, and I copied it without a drawing, Ziyur, although I found it drawn like a tree, Kamo Ilan."
Cordovero defined the genre in Pardes Rimonim, the Kabbalistic Summa in which he systematically reviews all aspects of classical Kabbalah. There, as expected, he addressed the question of the true structure of the Sephirotic arrangement. Opening chapter 6, the order of their arrangement, he observed that although Kabbalists often disagreed about the precise arrangement of the Sephirot, they drew forms, Zurot, for themselves on parchment sheets, Yeriot, and called them Ilan. His younger Italian contemporary, R. Menahem Azaria da Fano, 1548 to 1620, quickly composed an interpretive compendium of the Pardes entitled Pella Harimon, the slice of pomegranate, In his version, Menahem Azariah deliberately renamed the chapter The Drawing of the Ilan, Ziyur HaIlan, a significant maneuver. Menahem Azariah writes, "It is the custom of the sons," evoking the modern Jewish proverb, "The deeds of the sons are a sign of those of the fathers." They placed signs, Ziyurim, of the names of the Sephirot and their appellations on large and broad parchments and called them Ilanot. This description captures a fundamental feature of the classical Ilan, the aggregation of Sephirotic terms and associations within medallions. Once the definitive configuration of the tree was fixed, Cordovero treats the network of interconnections among the Sephirotic hubs in the seventh gate, Sha'ar. As we already saw, problematized in Me'irat Einayim, a fundamental question was how to explain intra-Sephirotic communication given their distinct essential qualities. Moreover, how could a mechanism so simple, the tree of the Sephirot, generate the diversity of creation? Communication was affected by Tzinorot, channels connecting them. Since the tree is a hidden structure, invisible to the eye, these channels are established by resemblance or sympathies. Because each Sephirah comprises the 10, resemblances exist. Hesed and Gevurah may appear opposed, yet the Gevurah within Hesed and the Hesed within Gevurah are similar. Therefore, they establish a link. Just as Ramon Lull had used revolving wheels in his Ars Generalis Ultima, 1295, to list divine attributes and possible combinations, Cordovero designed a knowledge-generating diagram to advance his own argument. In an ordinary image of the Sephirotic tree, Cordovero showed the 22 channels that articulate it. In early manuscripts, these are augmented with 10 revolving discs, pierced at the center with small knotted cords and stitched in place, volvels, from Latin volver, to turn. These combinatorial wheels, inscribed with Sephirotic names as spokes, model and experientially confirm the infinite potential of the structure. Not all Kabbalists resorted to such mechanical calculators. Cordovero mentions a Sefer HaTzinorot, Book of the Channels, in which no fewer than 600,000 channels circulating within the Sephirotic tree were detailed. That work, he writes, was known to the Kabbalists of Fez, but unfortunately, not to him. The remark prompted Menahem Azariah Dafano to comment that he did know it firsthand, and that it was not a book but an Ilan of 600,000 channels, made by a master to the highest standards and specifications. He says, were numerous instructions, halakot merubot, for its execution, which he proceeds to paraphrase across 7 of the 8 chapters of his version of the Sha'ar HaTzinorot, Gate of the Channels. Gikatilla wrote Sha'are Ora as an introduction to Kabbalah, referring in this case to the Sephirot. A perennial favorite, this text represents the pinnacle of the genre of commentaries on the Sephirot. Its clear and engaging style made it highly popular with readers from the outset, including Christians. In 1516, Paulus Riccius, 1480 to 1541, a German convert to Christianity, published a paraphrastic translation entitled Portae Lucis, making it the first Kabbalistic work to be printed. Its frequently reproduced title page, designed by Leonhard Beck, depicts an elderly man, perhaps Paulus Riccius himself, holding a Sephirotic tree by the channel that connects Yesod with Malkut, figure Shichi. The tree represented in this iconic image, however, was inspired neither by Gikatilla's text nor by the most significant diagram of the original Hebrew work. If anything, it appears to be an inversion of a 12th century image of Lady Dialectic, Dialectica Domina, presenting the tree of Porphyry, or something akin to it. This image may be understood as a visual argument for Kabbalah as a kind of philosophia perennis, thus linking the ancient philosopher with the Kabbalistic Porphyrian tree. Riccius's Portae Lucis did not include a reproduction of Gikatilla's Sephirotic diagram. Nevertheless, this micrographically formed figure was copied with remarkable consistency in Hebrew manuscripts and printed editions over the centuries. From a representational point of view, Gikatila's diagram is ambiguous. With its balanced symmetry, it may resemble a candelabrum, a set of scales, a human figure, or a tree. Gikatila designed the diagram as an epistemic image intended to clarify his discussion of Tiferet, which he, like Itzchak, regarded as the central line, hakav ha'emiyai, of the Sephirotic arrangement. Tiferet was literally central to Gikatila's understanding of Kabbalah. As he wrote in his introduction, Tiferet is the Tetragrammaton, the true name of God, and all the other biblical divine names, which he equated with the Sephirot, revolve around it. Conceptually, this idea recalls the wheel diagram of 1284 in the Paris manuscript. Gikatila, however, goes further. The entire Sephirotic arrangement can be represented as the Tetragrammaton Yod He Vav He. Keter is the thorn of the Yod, that is, its calligraphic crown. Hokmah is the letter Yod, Binah the first He. The 6 Sephirot from Hesed to Yesod are the Vab, and Malkut is the final He. Within this framework, Tiferet, as the heart of the central complex of 6 Sephirot, becomes its metonymy and is therefore uniquely associated with the Vav. The morphology of the letter Vav, V, a straight vertical line, is appropriate to the Sephirah that encapsulates the central axis of the structure. It is in this context that the tree appears, but only as a fleeting metaphor. The central line is like the trunk of the tree, Keguf ha'ilan. For the most part, however, Gikatila emphasizes geometric ideals of balance and proportionality. Thus, even the letter Vav, in its extended form as a vertical figure, is conceived as a symbol of equilibrium and visual symmetry. R. Matatayas de la Cruz, one of the editors of the first published Sha'arei Ora, addresses an issue related to Tiferet that remained unresolved in Gikatila's text, the precise location of its analog, the quasi-sephira da'at, knowledge. This problem did not trouble Gikatila, but for de la Cruz, structural questions could not be entirely ignored, even in a book for beginners. According to de la Cruz, such dilemmas could be resolved by consulting the drawings of Ilanot drawn by masters of Kabbalah, Bizi Yurei ha-Ilanot sheze yeruba ale ha-Kabbalah. To this comment, de la Cruz added a modest arboreal diagram of his own hand. In doing so, he reinforced a passage in his general introduction, where he presents the reader with a drawing of the Sephirot for reference. Here is their drawing, Zayuran, in the order of their progression, Hishtalshelutan, and their branching, Histaafutam, in the likeness of a tree, Kedimyon Ha'ilan, with its branches and divisions. And this is what they call an Ilan of Kabbalah, Ilan HaKabbalah. De la Cruz's use of the term Ilan/Ote and his reference to what they call an Ilan make it clear that by his time, the usage was already well established. In the same introduction, de la Cruz recommends that students study Ma'areket ha-Elohut after completing Sha'arei Ora. The Ma'areket, as it is commonly called, was the first systematic presentation of a mature and integrated Kabbalistic system. If one looks back over the literary remains of Kabbalistic and proto-Kabbalistic speculation of the preceding period, one finds a multitude of approaches. Incipient notions of the Sephirot abound, but a fully consolidated theosophy is not yet in place. The Ma'areket represents a bold turn in the history of Kabbalistic discourse. A deliberately anonymous and synthetic voice in the integrative sense that silences the particular voices of earlier historical Kabbalists, and possibly even the Zoharic literature. Kabbalah has been systematized, its theosophy presented with an unprecedented scope and methodological rigor. Entire chapters of the Ma'areket are devoted to discussing the graphic arrangement of the Sephirot. The treatment of their structure and visualization begins in chapter 7, entitled Ma'areket HaSeder, the structure of the order of the Sephirot. The Ma'areket is completely unequivocal about the aim of these discussions, to establish the correct image of the Sephirotic constellation. The image is not incidental, but essential to the matter at hand. The importance of its graphic realization, the Zayur, drawing, is underscored by repeated exhortations for the reader to contemplate the image drawn on the page. Concluding a detailed discussion, the author declares that the structure resembles this form, Zot Hazura. The diagram that follows once again resembles the option on the right seen in Figure 10, with the 3 upper Sephirot aligned vertically. Once the constellation has been established, Chapter 8 of the Ma'areket turns to its interpretation. The metaphors employed are predominantly anthropomorphic. The Sephirotic arrangement corresponds to the human edifice, Binyan Adam, in a rhetorical gesture that perhaps suggests an awareness of a schematic affinity with the genealogical tree. We are also told that the upper Sephirot are the cosmic fathers, Avot Olam, and that those below are called the sons of the fathers. Soon, however, the human and arboreal metaphors become intertwined. The fathers are like the roots of the tree, Ke Shorshe Ha'ilan, the principal part of the edifice, Ikar Habinyan, and the sons are like the branches, yet only the branches bear fruit, that is, only the sons, and not the fathers, are worthy of sustaining the world. But there is no existence for the branch without its root. Having invested in this powerful metaphor, the Ma'areket effortlessly continues by recalling the cosmic all-tree of the Bahir. Nevertheless, anthropomorphic discourse generally predominates. A Zoharic comment, however, complicates matters. If the tree represents the Sephirot in the correct order, how is it to be reconciled with a passage in the Zohar that demands the inversion of the positions of Netzah and Hod? Here the question of perspective is once again introduced. I found no other solution than to say that one who approaches another person finds his own right opposite the other's left, and his left opposite the other's right. Thus Netzah, as it is drawn in the Ilan, is on our right, which is the left of the Holy One, blessed be He, and Hod is the right of the Holy One, blessed be He, and our left. Of course, the common Ilan repeatedly appealed to did not represent such a perspective. Its right side was unquestionably God's. And if Netzah and Hod were relatively indeterminate Sephirot, and therefore invertible, those above, Hesed and Din, benevolence and judgment, had to be associated with right and left respectively. To express the divine perspective, the entire Ilan would have to be rotated 180 degrees on its vertical axis, right and left, as dexter and sinister. But did such an exceptional Ilan ever exist? The answer leads us beyond the schema, towards the genre itself. And I testify that in an Italian city called Reggio, I saw an Ilan in the possession of a learned man that was drawn in this manner, inverted, and I was told that a great man had made it. It is unlikely that this referred to a diagram in a codex, such as those in Meir at Einayim, but rather to an Ilan on parchment, an instance of the genre. Its pedigree, attributed to a great man, implied that this mirror image of the prevailing tree could not be dismissed as a mere error of an ignorant scribe. More importantly, it allowed the author to affirm that, even when it appeared to contradict itself, the Zohar was never mistaken if properly understood. Ilanot became the common name of the genre over the course of the 15th century, gradually replacing Yeriot, literally sheets/leaves. The latter, Synekdosh, was rooted in the materiality of the artifacts, but also carried celestial associations, recalling Psalm 104:2, where the Lord stretches out the heavens like a tent, or like a curtain, Yeriah, a verse ubiquitous in Kabbalistic sources. It also evoked the famous saying of Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai, 1st century CE, cited in the Talmudic tractate on scribal arts, Maseket Soferim, 16:8. If all the heavens were parchment, Yeriah, and all the trees, Ilanot, pens, and all the seas ink, it would not suffice to write the wisdom I learned from my teachers. Cordovero elaborated the symbolic meaning of Yeriah in his Pardes Raimonim, Orchard of Pomegranates, explaining that the matter of the Yeriah is the secret of the expansion of the central Sephirah, Tifereh, a statement that must be understood in light of Psalm 104-2. Here, a Tifereh-centered conception of the Sephirotic tree reappears, with tangible graphic consequences. Such associations allow him to declare that, in fact, each Sephirah could be called a Yeriah. The fact that the preparation of parchment requires a period of stretching the skin further supported this expansive association. The identification of the arboreal schema with the parchment sheet became so complete that it was also possible to refer to an arboreal diagram on a codex page as a Yeriah. Thus, in Igeret HaHamudot, the Precious Letter, a work by the Italian Kabbalist Rabbi Eliyahu Hayim ben Binyamin of Genazzano, circa 1440 to circa 1510, the author's own diagram of the Sephirotic tree is introduced as follows. And here for you is the drawing, Ziur, of the Yeriah. These terminologies appear to have been composed with Ilanot specifically in mind within the circle of the 14th century Italian Kabbalist rabbi. Reuven Safati, or Zafati, an early commentator on the Ma'arechet. Two of his works bear the revealing titles Perush Hayeriah Hagedolah, Commentary on the Great Parchment, and Perush Hayeriah Haketana, Commentary on the Small Parchment. Textual variants among copies confirm the interchangeability of Yeriah and Ilan by the mid-15th century. Around 1550, a Venetian scribe who copied Sarfati's Perush Hayeriah Hagedolah from a parchment into a miscellaneous codex explained, "This is from a parchment sheet, Yeriah, called an Ilan, and I copied the account, Sipur, written in each Sephirah, and I copied it without a drawing, Ziyur, although I found it drawn like a tree, Kemo Ilan." Cordovero defined the genre in Pardes Raimonim, the Kabbalistic Summa, in which he systematically reviews all aspects of classical Kabbalah. There, as expected, he addressed the question of the true structure of the Sephirotic arrangement. Opening chapter 6, the order of their arrangement, he observed that although Kabbalists often disagreed about the precise arrangement of the Sephirot, they would draw forms, Zurot, for themselves on sheets of parchment, Yeriot, and call them an Ilan. His young Italian contemporary R. Menahem Azariah da Fano, 1548 to 1620, swiftly composed an interpretive compendium of the Pardes entitled Pella Harimon, the slice of the pomegranate. In his version, Menahem Azariah deliberately renamed the chapter The Drawing of the Ilan, Ziur HaIlan, a significant move. Menahem Azariah writes, "It is the custom of the sons," evoking the modern Jewish proverb, "The deeds of the sons are a sign of those of the fathers." They placed signs, Ziyurim, of the names of the Sephirot and their appellations upon large and spacious parchments, and they called them Ilanot. This description captures a fundamental feature of the classical Ilan, the aggregation of Sephirotic terms and associations within medallions. Once the definitive configuration of the tree had been established, Cordovero addressed the network of interconnections among the Sephirotic hubs in the seventh gate, Sha'ar. As we have already seen problematized in Me'irat Einayim, a fundamental question was how to explain intra-Sephirotic communication given their distinct essential qualities. Moreover, how could so simple a mechanism, the tree of the Sephirot, generate the diversity of creation? Communication was effected by means of tzinorot, channels, that connect them. Since the tree is a hidden structure, invisible to the eye, these channels are established by resemblance or sympathies. Because each Sephirah contains all 10, resemblances exist. Hesed and Gevurah may appear to be opposites, yet the Gevurah within Hesed and the Hesed within Gevurah are similar. Therefore, they establish a connection. Just as Ramon Lull had employed rotating wheels in his Ars Generalis Ultima, 1295, to list divine attributes and possible combinations, Cordovero designed a knowledge-generating diagram to advance his own argument. In a standard image of the Sephirotic tree, Cordovero displayed the 22 channels that articulate it. In early manuscripts, these are augmented by 10 rotating discs, pierced at the center with small knotted cords sewn into place. Volvels, from the Latin volvere, to turn. These combinatorial wheels, inscribed with Sephirotic names as spokes, experientially model and confirm the infinite potential of the structure. Not all Kabbalists resorted to such mechanical calculators. Cordovero mentions a Sefer HaTzinorot, Book of the Channels, in which no fewer than 600,000 channels circulating within the Sephirotic tree were detailed. That work, he writes, was known to the Kabbalists of Fez, but unfortunately not to him. This remark prompted Menahem Azariah Dafano to comment that he did know it at first hand, and that it was not a book, but rather an Ilan of 600,000 channels, fashioned by a master according to the highest standards and specifications. Upon it, he says, were numerous instructions, halachot merubot, for its execution, which he proceeds to paraphrase throughout 7 of the 8 chapters of his version of the Sha'ar HaTzinorot, Gate of the Channels. The complete instructions are preserved in several manuscripts. One Italian manuscript of the 16th century presents the manual following 15 introductory Kabbalistic teachings. The first of these is the requirement to believe in the first cause and the 10 Sephirot, and the last stipulates that one who begins the study of this science must first learn all the drawings, ziurim, and how all the worlds are linked one to another. And these must be drawn, mezuyarim, before him, so that he may comprehend and understand. What follows is the complete instructional manual for working with the 4 worlds, developed in detail and employing a distinctive and highly technical vocabulary intended to guide the draftsman. The role of the scribe is paramount. Taken together, the Sephirot constitute the supernal image, Demet Elion, the image of God according to which human beings were created. Here again, the leap between the text, circa 1300, and the commentary, circa 1500, allows us to observe a consolidation of the arboreal perception of the Sephirotic arrangement. From its earliest printed editions, both in Mantua and in Ferrara in 1558, the Ma'areket has been inseparable from the commentary of Rabbi Yehuda Hayat, Minhat Yehuda, Offering of Judah, which appeared alongside it in those and in all subsequent editions. Hayat, a Spanish Kabbalist expelled in 1492, circa 1450 to circa 1510, found refuge in northern Italy after enduring severe privations. In that safe space, he suddenly found himself in a position of authority. He embodied Spanish Kabbalah. The Ma'areket enjoyed great popularity among Italian Jews, who, given their inclination towards autodidacticism and philosophical sophistication, found the work particularly appealing. It therefore constituted the ideal platform from which to assert the primacy of the Spanish traditions, with the Zohar at their head at that historical moment. like the Zohar and Hayat himself, the Ma'areket was a work of Spanish origin, though it had charted its own course. If its anonymous author was familiar with Zoharic literature, which in many respects represented a Kabbalah antithetical to his own, his work effectively suppressed any mention of it. At the beginning of the 16th century, Italian Jews knew little of the Zohar, apart from passages cited by Rabbi Menahem Rekanati, 1250 to 1310, in his Torah commentary. In this way, Hayat bestowed upon the Ma'areket what might be called the Zoharic treatment. When the Ma'areket contradicted the Zohar, Hayat took pains to establish the authority of the latter in the eyes of his readers. In this spirit, with regard to the structure of the Sephirotic arrangement, Hayat rejected the configuration and replaced it with a pyramidal triangulation that mirrored, or inverted, the lower triads, 200. This arrangement, Hayat maintained, was implicit in half a dozen extensive Zoharic passages cited consecutively in his commentary on Chapter 7. After expressing his vehement disagreement, the citations begin. Observe also what is written in the book Zohar. Thus have we learned, from the aspect of the father hangs the supernal Hesed, from the aspect of the mother hangs the Geburah. In this way, all are bound to one another. Zohar 3:118b. This establishes that Hokmah, the supernal father, is on the right side, and that Binah is on the left. 201 Hesed is situated beneath Hokmah, and Geburah beneath Binah. The authority of the Zohar left no room for doubt. What is particularly striking in this context is Hayat's language. In the interval between the Ma'areket and the commentary Minhat Yehuda, the lexicon has shifted. The configuration of the Sephirot is no longer called a figure or form, but is systematically termed an Ilan. Hayat employs this designation in passing while reviewing the Zoharic passages that contradict the structure defended by the author of the Ma'areket. In his treatment of one such passage, Zohar 121b, we see how this new usage of the term goes hand in hand with an intensified ontologization of the schema. As with Isaac of Acre, consideration of the image of the Sephirot compelled Hayat to confront the question of perspective. Are the right and left sides of the Sephirotic tree ours, or God's? 202. Hayat's difficulty was not occasioned by a strange Ilan, but by a perplexing Zoharic text. In that text, Neza, the Sephirah situated immediately beneath Hesed on the right side of the tree, is called Jacob's left thigh, and Hayat was compelled to account for this statement on the part of the authoritative work. Even more perplexingly, the same passage enumerates Neza and Hod as the fourth and fifth of the lower powers respectively, as if their positions had not been altered at all, the right axiomatically preceding the left. To express the inherent limitations of the material support, Hayat points to the constraints of the parchment sheet. A codex page could be transformed into a dynamic object by attaching volvels to the nodes of the arboreal diagram, or multiple parchment sheets could be joined together to create a scroll of epic proportions. On such a scroll, a scribe could trace an expansive diagram displaying dizzying networks of channels, branches sprouting from other branches almost without end. It is hardly surprising that the privileged medium for transmitting this message remained the volvel. The intricately interconnected Ilan, whether drawn with 600,000 lines or set in motion by 10 volvels raised to the 10th power, was imagined as the infinitely prolific generator of reality itself. Seen from this perspective, the Kabbalistic tree was understood to do far more than merely produce, and far more than simply represent knowledge. It is the image of the all tree. The 600,000 lines of flight, to borrow an expression from Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, effectively constitute the Ilan as a rhizomatic tree, thereby surpassing the binary opposition established by Deleuze and Guattari themselves. Once the primary meaning of the term Ilan came to denote the cartographic genre associated with the arboreal schema of the same name, its medium became an inseparable part of its message. How the Ilan was drawn and on what it was drawn became interwoven questions. We have already seen indications of this: enormous parchments that had to be procured, volvels that had to be cut out and sewn. To a considerable extent, this materiality shaped the meanings of the Ilanot. By this, I mean the many things they were meant to do. Classical, pre-Lurianic Kabbalah made do with 10 Sephirot, visualized in various ways. The versatile, arboreal schema gradually proved to be the most popular means of representing the Sephirot as a branching arrangement of labeled medallions. As we have seen, a sheet of parchment was not strictly necessary to draw such a figure. It did, however, enable Kabbalists to enlarge the image, allowing them to trace broad circles connected by wide channels. The geometry of the schema ensured that a substantial amount of blank space remained within and around it, and that space too could be put to use. Every student of Kabbalah was required to study the Sephirot. They were the keys to the kingdom. In practice, this meant being familiar with their primary names, secondary appellations, and tertiary associations, as well as with the qualities of each of the paths connecting them to one another. One could read a treatise such as Kikatila's Sha'arei Ora to learn about each sephira, its divine name, corresponding bodily limb, day of the week, patriarch, color, and so forth. But one could also explore a parchment map that presented this same information inscribed precisely where it belonged. To explore Hesed, for example, one would read the inscriptions in and around its medallion. Unlike Gikatila's linear presentation in Sha'arei Ora, the Ilan offered a memory palace-like matrix of stratified and patterned information. By communicating Kabbalistic knowledge in this way, the Ilanot fostered its retention and stimulated its creative recombination. With the emergence of Lurianic Kabbalah at the end of the 16th century, the theosophical plane became astonishingly intricate. As Rabbi Hayim Vital, 1543 to 1620, the most prominent and prolific writer among Luria's disciples, wrote, "It had previously been possible to master the theosophical mechanics of the classical Sephirotic God in just a few days of study, but Luria's teaching belonged to an entirely different order of complexity." He was not exaggerating. The new system added unprecedented structural detail and placed a new emphasis on the dynamic emanative process within the divinity. The details need not concern us here. For present purposes, it suffices to note the great demands that the new Kabbalah placed upon diagrammatic imagination, and consequently upon the physical media used to learn, teach, and practice it. Beyond inscribing texts in loco, the Lurianic Ilan had to present a diachronic image of the topography of the divinity. If the classical Ilan was a map, then the Lurianic Ilan was a map laid out along a timeline. Although the demands of Lurianism made scrolls composed of multiple sewn membranes the norm rather than the exception, the generic constitution of the Ilan as a parchment, sirol, meant that it was not simply read, it was unrolled. Even if it was stored folded, once opened, the parchment naturally tended to curl as it was explored. This movement, intrinsic to the reading of a roll, is captured by the word volume, that which one unrolls, volvere. This reveals a great deal about the genre. As Peter Stalybras put it, the roll, as a technology, permits a literal unrolling, in which the continuity of a moment of the narrative is materially and symbolically. His reflection requires only slight adjustments to fit the Ilan. It is true that one cannot easily move back and forth between distant points on a roll, but it is precisely this back and forth movement that the Ilan requires. The narrative may include the story, encoded in the diagrammatic presentation of structures and processes of emanation, from the infinite to the sublunar world. If anything, the significance of physical proximity is even greater in the Ilanot than in typical textual rolls, because the diagrammatic elements are interwoven, sequential, and continuous. Their proximity is no less meaningful than the placement of adjacent stops on subway maps. The unique valence of the roll in Jewish culture is of paramount importance. Much has been written about the transition from roll to codex. By all accounts, Jews adopted the latter at some point around the 9th century. Of the hundreds of rotulae found in the Cairo Geniza, approximately half are liturgical and were designed for personal devotion. They are predominantly of 11th century Egyptian provenance and were often produced by their own users from cheap and recycled materials for convenience and portability. Many were written on the blank verso of rotola, originally written in Arabic. Although it is tempting to draw a parallel with the liturgical use of these rotulae for personal devotion, I consider it unlikely that these inexpensive paper rolls had anything to do with parchment becoming the constitutive medium of the Ilan in pre-expulsion Spain, Byzantium, or Italy. One may say that the Ilanot served personal devotion, but they were no less dedicated to mapping cosmological topography and, especially in the case of Lurianic artifacts, to tracing a cosmogonic timeline. Yet there was another potential source of inspiration. Rotulae, presenting genealogies of kings and chronicles of history, circulated widely, and hundreds of copies survive across Europe. When the need arose, an unrollable chronology may well have presented itself as a natural choice. Specialists in Hebrew codicology have never remarked upon the Kabbalistic readoption of the rotulus. To appreciate the implications of this late development, it must be stressed that by the end of the Middle Ages, rolls had no mundane applications in Jewish life. Books were studied, parchments were ritually enacted. Although I often refer to the Ilanot as rotulae, the technical term preferred for vertically rather than horizontally rolled parchments, the latter often called scrolls. Hebrew nomenclature makes no such distinction. Jews used parchment rolls, referred to by terms including sefer, book, and Megillah, roll, exclusively in ritual contexts. The Sefer Torah and the Scroll of Esther, the phylacteries and the mezuzah. Beyond these rolls, Jews might use amulets which, like the phylacteries and the mezuzah, operated when encapsulated. By virtue of its materiality, the Ilan was thus, ipso facto, a ritual object in the Jewish sense. Ritual demanded a combination of textual study, visualization, and mental manipulation. The latter refers to the work that had to be carried out in the mind's eye, beginning with the graphic cues of the diagrammatic image. The image, quite simply put, was of God. Its ritual enactment is best understood by analogy with the use of maps, not with the practical navigational aids so common today, but with the central, virtual reality function of pre-modern maps. Just as a map of the Holy Land invited an imaginary pilgrimage, a sephirotic map offered its user an encounter with the divine. The lines connecting the arboreal figures in the Ilanot preserved traces of emanative pathways and invited dynamic contemplation. Even without being contemplated, such images were possessions of incalculable value. The Ilanot were magical, not by virtue of special designs and symbols, but because their representational content connected them causally with the relationally constituted cosmos. Simply by signifying what they signified, the Ilanot were talismanic, presumed capable of capturing and making present that which they imagined. To contemplatively unroll a map of God was to practice Kabbalah.
The Ilan is not born to decorate a book, nor to illustrate a theory. It is born because mystery needs form, in order to be contemplated without breaking. Because the infinite, if it does not fold, burns. The Kabbalist does not look at the tree, he enters it, he walks it, as one walks a sacred city. He knows that each node is not a concept, but a station of being. That each channel does not connect ideas, but real flows of life. That is why the parchment matters. It is not a neutral support, it is skin, stretched, worked, consecrated, like the world itself. The gesture of unrolling the Ilan is not technical, it is liturgical. The body accompanies the mind. The hands follow what the intellect can barely intuit. Time becomes spatial. The history of creation unfolds before the eyes. Here the tree ceases to be a metaphor. It is architecture. It is a symbolic machine. It is an operative map of divine functioning. And then the decisive thing happens. The Ilan no longer speaks of God up there, but of God here, circulating, descending, recomposing. This is not theology, it is sacred engineering. The Kabbalist knows that to contemplate is to act, that to see correctly is to intervene, that by aligning the mind with the structure of the tree, the world is adjusted, just a little. That is why these diagrams were not books, opened at random. They were objects of power, talismanic not by superstition, but because to represent order is to participate in it. Thus, the Ilan becomes a mirror. Whoever contemplates it learns to see himself as a channel, as a branch, as a place of passage between above and below. And at that point, the tree is no longer on the parchment, it begins to grow in the observer.